That's interesting. We've already started with something interesting.
Yes.
Right?
So have you noticed that he's not into all the emotion?
Oh yeah, that's why he mentioned that, because he think I'm too emotional.
Hey guys, and welcome to Little Black Book 91. Yes, we're giving you guys a video on the Never Ever Meets, but we're talking about dismissive avoidance. Yes, if you don't know what that means, it's one of the 4 attachment styles labeled by John Bowlby, who did an experiment about how young babies attach themselves to the caregiver. And the dismissive attachment style, I think, is really present in this moment. What you just saw from Chris there, and I'll play up a few more clips so you can actually see it, is that he actually starts talking about how he doesn't really do emotions. He thinks she's too emotional. He doesn't allow himself to feel the way he does. And he also does what we call like deactivation tactics, which I can explain a little bit later on. And what that essentially means is that he creates distance between himself and the other party in the relationship in order to maintain control of the relationship and of self. Yes, dismissive avoidance, which I'm one of them. We find it very difficult to maintain relationships when they get too emotional, where people get too close to us, where it becomes too clingy, or people are asking too much of us, right? And we saw it earlier on in the season. If you watch the show, trust me, you're still able to understand this video. We saw earlier on in the show what happened when he started mouthing off to everybody, saying how he's not with anybody, no one can hold him down, and he's single when he came into the house, when we all knew he came with a Sandia girl, right? And that's one of the ways of a dismissive avoidant, to create distance in order to maintain control of himself and his boundaries and his emotions, right? Because we believe that emotions are weakness, okay? And it's one way to maintain that control. So that's what we end up doing, okay? And so I believe that's perfectly placed for someone like himself as well. So we're going to get into this video. We're going to break it all the way down. So make sure you do me a massive favor. Like it, share, subscribe, click on the bell button for notification of the uploads. We appreciate you. Stay locked and stay loaded as well. And listen, we are about to get deep.
Deeper.
Yes, if you're somebody who suffers with this dismissive attachment, again, it is about the way that you relate to someone or relate to others, right? And the dismissive avoidance find it difficult. They like to be self-reliant, they're hyper-individualized or hyper-dependent. They create distance emotionally, and they have a lot of distrust for other people, right? And you're going to hear Chris talk about this. They have a lot of distrust, and you have to earn their trust. You have to earn it almost through consistency, being there, almost overriding some of their own issues in order to show them that they actually care. I know exactly how this feels. I'm one of them, so I know exactly how it plays. Let's listen a bit more to what he's got to say.
I mean, it's not something I can just cut off, so.
Like, of course, I'm intact with my emotions, but not to the sense of a sensitive guy. I'm not sensitive.
I know he likes to think he's not sensitive, but he is sensitive, right? That's the whole reason why you are dismissive avoidant. You're sensitive, and I guess you might not like that word, and many people might not like that word, right? But when we say sensitive, what I really mean by that is that because as a young child, more than likely this happens when you're in childhood, what happened is that young child's emotional needs were neglected. And so the caregiver was unable to provide a consistent amount of emotional need, or they neglected it completely, or just wasn't really there for you emotionally. And what tends to happen is a child learns that actually I can't rely on a caregiver, and then they translate that into life. I can't rely on other people. And I feel it all the time. There's times where I'm just like, I don't want to rely on that person, because what if you're not here tomorrow? I need to be able to stand on my own 2 feet. Just in case you're not here tomorrow, I need to survive. And that's the mindset that the avoidance seems to always have. And so what ends up happening is you can't form deep relationships with people, or you struggle to, because you are always aware of somebody potentially abandoning you, which is one of the wounds of a dismissive avoidant, which we'll start talking about more. I'll do some videos on this separately as well so you guys can see it. But yeah, so you're afraid of that wound of being potentially abandoned or left behind, or feel like somebody's going to do too much, or you're afraid of disappointing people. There's another one. You're afraid of disappointing people, so you try to hold back so that they can't rely on you. But in this case here with Chris and what we see with Sandia, he has created distance by stating that he's single, whatever. He now tells us he's not sensitive, but she's overly sensitive. And that's one thing, again, dismissives don't really like, is that because they are so desensitized to their own needs and their wants and their own emotions at points in time, right? They literally disregard it and suppress it. They expect other people to do the same. And when people don't do that, they call them over emotional, or you're too soft, or you're making a scene or whatever. You're doing too much. When in reality, they may not be doing too much. You're just not doing enough. And I think that's where Chris is at the moment. We're not really seeing him show that emotional connection to Sandia. The question really is actually, why is Sandia there? Why is she staying in a relationship where her own needs are not being met? And the reality of the situation is it's probably because she's also experienced a lifetime, or a childhood, I should say, of growing up where also her emotional needs weren't necessarily met. She's just repeating a pattern. And for him, he's maintaining control. If he gets a girl that wants him, and this is another thing about avoidance, they tend to end up meeting anxious people. Anxious people meaning another type of attachment style. The anxious attachment style is really concerned with, I should say preoccupied. They call it the AP, anxious preoccupied. Preoccupied with trying to get their needs met, right? But they do this oftentimes by leaning in and grabbing a hold of something, right? So they oftentimes are trying to control. I don't want to say control in a bad way, but in a sense of they're always anxious about being abandoned, so they hold on tighter. Right? They do things not to perturb the relationship. They do things not to cause any destabilization in the relationship, and they do whatever they can to make sure they hold on to a relationship. Whereas an avoidant will end up disregarding, disconnecting, and sabotaging a relationship. And an anxious person will try to keep it as much as possible. When these two meet, it's a problem, because the avoidant wants to lean away, the anxious tries to pull that person back in, and both are seeking validation from the other party, because the avoidant wants to know that you actually really care about them, and every time they pull away, they want you to pull them back in, really and truly. And then the anxious person wants validation too, because they want, as soon as you pull away, they want to prove they can pull you back in. So this is why these two are still together, and why they're still trying to make it work, because they're not really being honest about how they actually feel. Let's go a bit further.
So sometimes when the emotions are too much for me, I'm like, I just don't want to, I run away.
He just walks away from it.
So this brother said, I'm not sensitive, but yet when the emotions become too much, you walk away. Think about what you're saying. I'm not a sensitive person, but when the emotions become too much, I walk away. But we barely see you have any money. We barely see you talk about emotions, my brother. And the reason being is because as a dismissive avoidant, you don't want to acknowledge your feelings, because there's a feeling of vulnerability and weakness attached to sharing feelings. The dismissive avoidant hasn't found a safe space to be able to share their feelings and their thoughts with someone. And so, they have to prove, that person, Sandia, has to prove herself over a consistent amount of time that she ain't gonna leave. Then he'll begin to share. But even then, he's caught up in a pattern of behavior, right? So it's actually on him to actually do the work. It's not on the other party to provide a consistent amount of behavior, which he should anyway, right? But even a consistent behavior is not a guarantee that someone like Chris will now begin to open up. It's not a guarantee. Now, of course, he has opened up a little bit later on in this episode, actually, with the therapist or the coach, and he explains about his 8-year relationship which he went through, and that kind of gives us a bit more understanding as to why he is the way he is and why he thinks the way he is. That's another thing about dismissives. They do want people to understand why they do what they do, because remember, their emotional needs were not met. So whenever they do something, what they want is understanding. I literally felt this today. I was like, yo, sometimes I feel like I just want people to understand how I feel. And then that can be a trigger, because sometimes when people don't take time to understand how I feel or understand what I'm thinking or why I meant by that, I get triggered, you know what I mean? And then that causes me to disconnect. Okay.
Why do you run away from emotional things?
Shall I say, maybe from past experiences? I was in an 8-year relationship that didn't go.
You notice how he's holding himself when he's telling this? Talking about how he's in an 8-year relationship, but he's holding himself while he's talking. That kind of just showed me a little bit of that self-soothing. Some of the things that we do when we're dismissive, avoidant, when we disconnect, we go to self-soothe. But the reality is, and I love this wording by, I think it was Tyus Gibson, where he said, we don't really actually self-soothe. See, if you were to self-soothe, you would actually do something to address the issue. You're not addressing the issue. Right, a lot of us, when we're talking about self-soothing, what we really mean is that we're going to do something to numb the pain. So when I feel like I'm disconnecting, I feel like you're frustrating me, and I feel like I want to pull away, and I feel this a lot of times too. Like with people, I can't lie to you, and it's a very, very big struggle sometimes, because people, you feel it come up. You know what I'm saying to you? You feel it come up, and when it comes up, you just want to. You disconnect. You don't want to talk. You don't interested in what they got to say, because at that point, all you're hearing in your brain is they don't actually care. If they did, they wouldn't do this, right? And so that narrative in your mind keeps running around and keeps playing. So I notice that at times I've become very distant with people, because it's like it's too much, but it's not too much. It's just that I'm overwhelmed. I'm overwhelmed because I don't know how to deal with what I'm feeling, what I'm hearing, and I haven't learned techniques to actually ground myself to make sure that I can cope with what's coming my way, as well. And there's obviously techniques like grounding, breathing exercises, counting exercises, kind of just calm your nervous system down, which starts to remember some of the painful memories and thoughts that you occurred as a child when you were ignored or you were neglected in your emotional needs. And when you find it happening here, like you said, an 8-year relationship, which is going to go wrong, there's a bigger thing in here, right? And I think I'll do a part 2. I want to keep it nice and short. I'll do a part 2 of this because there's a bigger part of the story we need to address with. But listen, if you're going through something like this and this is something that you're dealing with, shout me. This is what we do. We're working with clients to make sure we can bring healing to you guys. Sign up for the coaching, okay? Click on the description box down below. Sign up to my calendar. It's not free, but it is up to you what you pay. I want you to pay according to whatever you believe. I want you to, according to what you believe, according to what you believe, it's worth. You know what I'm saying to you? So, hey, I want you guys to get the healing you need. In Jesus' name, pray. Amen. Why did I just pray? Appreciate you guys.